Hey, what's up guys? I am Follygon, and in this video I am going to walk you through my entire character sculpting process. This time I'm going to be working off of a concept image from Marco Silvart based off of a photo from Aline Minero. This is going to be my third video in this style where I go from start to finish and kind of show off my entire character creation process. The last time I did one of these, I did Zelda as a basketball star on the Hyrule hookshots. And before that, I did this demonic witch character for Halloween. Both of those were a ton of fun. If you haven't checked them out, I'll throw a link down in the description for you to check those out. So where do we start this character? Well, probably in the same place I start all of my personal work, which is with a blank canvas and a ball of digital clay. I spent a good amount of time in my last couple videos that I just mentioned going over my blockout process, which is those initial stages of development. But for this character, things are going to be more than a little different. And that is because I will be sculpting this character in a unique pose. I mentioned in my last video that the more extreme a pose is, the better idea it is to just start in that pose from the very beginning. The other option would be to create your character in some form of a neutral pose, like a T-pose, which originally I would have thought that only 3D artists would have known what that meant, but with the advent of memes and popular culture, right, it's a lot more ubiquitous now. So that other option would be to start in that T-pose and then pose the character later on after you created it. But because the form of this character is so tight and squashed into a ball, all of the limbs are bent at unique angles, which changes the anatomical forms, it's really just a better idea for me to sculpt it directly into this shape from the very beginning. I'll still be keeping some of the forms symmetrical to save on time, but overall this is going to be a very different process than what you would normally see me do while sculpting a character. Specifically, the torso, legs, and shoulders are going to be very tricky. I also end up with some pretty nice workarounds for some interesting problems later on that I will talk about more in depth once we get to those. In this video, I would like to talk more about the middle stages of working on a character, because in the past I've talked a lot more about blocking out forms in the earlier stages, and I've even created tutorials on my process for that. I'll throw a link up somewhere for that video so you guys can check it out if you're interested, but in this video I wanted to keep it fresh and avoid the repetition. And maybe talk about some of the particular challenges with this character, which there were quite a few. And one of those major challenges is working from a single reference image. The main obvious issue there is that you can only see so much, right? In the image I am using, I only get a profile of the character's body, curled up into a tight ball. And then a lot of what I'm trying to create is hidden from view. It is obviously very hard to sculpt what you can't see. A lot of the face is hidden, so I can't exactly tell what is going on with the jawline or the profile of the face, the character's back, stomach, etc. There's really just a lot hidden here. So how do you get around this? How do you fill in the blanks? Well, a lot of it is experience. I have sculpted a number of characters, and because of that, I have a decent enough knowledge base of anatomical form to sculpt most of what I can't see. And for the areas where I really struggle, I can of course try to find additional reference, filling in those blanks where necessary, but not straying too far away from the original style and reference image. There are other challenges like the hair being dark and a little sketchy, so it's hard to make out some concrete forms. There is a lot of compression happening in the body, which is a tough thing to deal with. This pose in general is just pretty tough to do. That's why I wanted to do it though. I try to focus on improving different skills with each new project, and this is definitely challenging me, and hopefully improving my posing skills as well. I'll say more on posing later, but for now, I still want to keep a lot of this character symmetrical until I get a little further down the road. That definitely saves on time in these earlier stages. I often like to add color to help tell proportions, which I think I've mentioned in the past, but essentially the idea here is that it's much easier to figure out proportions when you can get that color weight on your character early on, even if it's simple and ugly, kind of like what we have right now. Normally blocking in as much as I can early to get a better feel for where things need to change, color at this stage is more of a helpful tool than anything else, and not the final paint that will be on this character. I am overpainting a lot of the highlights and shadows to get an idea of if my forms are lining up with the illustration. Later on, when I go to render, I will want my physical lighting that I set up to do most of that work. It's really easy to paint too much highlights or too much shadow and make things look just completely awkward. If you want to go for a hand-painted look, I recommend that you go full force in that direction and not try to go for something in between. that ends up messing up your lights. So you have these physical lights, and then you have these hand-painted highlights and shadows, and just overall it looks very awkward. I would try to avoid that. I know the way the head is sitting on the neck looks very weird right now, but I want to keep the head symmetrical while I work, at least a little bit longer. I want to keep most of this character symmetrical for as long as I can so I can save on time, and once I get most of the parts finished, then I can start getting more asymmetry in there. It can be tough while sculpting to get too focused on how things are looking right now, but you have to be confident that you know things will shape up with time, and honestly that is something that just comes with experience. The more you do it, the more comfortable you will be with the awkward stages, and the quicker you're going to get out of those as well. I feel like working on a character's face, especially something that needs to be beautiful, is pretty much always a daunting task. It is rarely something that immediately comes together. It is more of an iterative process, building up layer by layer until you slowly get closer to where you want to be. But to do that, you need to spend a long time building a strong foundation for your form, worrying more about getting all the facial structure and features down before you begin to worry about accuracy or how beautiful your character is. If you rush ahead without the strong foundation, you are really simply just going to create more work for yourself down the road. So try to work smarter, not harder, right? I'm sure you've all heard that before. That is definitely the case here when working on the foundation for your form. I do the exact same thing with the body. Like I said before, there is so little that I can see that I have to infer a lot of information based off of the silhouette, which is honestly fine. That is kind of what I'm used to. You would be surprised by how often clients will hand you a single image to work from as a reference, so it's not really the end of the world, but it does require a lot of time sculpting. So when I'm working on the body, I am constantly checking my reference from one view, and I rotate and manipulate the form from as many extreme views as possible. So it's this constant back and forth process, reference, sculpt a little, reference, sculpt a little. I want this to be accurate from this one particular angle, but if you only pay attention to that one particular side, then things can end up more than a little terrible from all of your other angles. They could be flat or stretched, or the volume just doesn't wrap properly. But that is why we are 3D artists, right? If we only wanted to do one single view, then we would have become 2D artists, or maybe you blend a little bit and do some of both. So I spend a little bit more time here on the body, and of course make many returning passes to it in the future. Blocking out the clothes is easy, but time consuming. The hair is kind of the same way. This hair is especially tough because it's black, so it's difficult to make out the form. And it's roughly painted in as well, more so giving the idea of hair than anything else, which makes for a tough time when translating to 3D. But it's far from the worst I've ever had to work with, so I do think I'll be okay here. Actually, I know I'll be okay here. I've already done it, right? But originally, I thought that the hair on the back of the head was a single bun that the hair was pulled back into, but later on, after I moved the head around into the appropriate angle, that's when I found out that they were twin buns, or I'm not really sure what you call that because I can't personally do that with my hair, right? But these are the kinds of things that can be really hard to tell when you only have a single image to work from, and you'll only discover them after spending more time with the character. The arms and legs of this character gave me a lot of frustration because I can only see so much, of course, and I've never done a pose exactly like this one before. They were definitely one of the hardest parts of this character, but like everything else, with patience and a lot of sculpting, it eventually does come together. I had to come up with some interesting solutions to keep specific parts of the body from merging together though, which if you haven't done a ton of digital sculpting maybe doesn't make a ton of sense, so I'll try to explain it a little bit here. One function of ZBrush that I use quite frequently is called Dynamesh. Without getting too technical, it's essentially a way for you to dynamically update your topology or polygons to keep them from getting too stretched or pinched in certain areas. It has a lot of other use cases, but another main one is that it can Boolean geometry together. So this means it can merge geometry together, it can also remove and subtract, and really it's awesome and super powerful, but where it can be troublesome is, for instance, like with this character, considering the bend of the legs, I have to be careful that I do not Dynamesh my legs anymore, because that would cause them to merge together in all the areas where they are touching. And that is obviously not something I want. Now there are ways around this, and I have taken precautions to avoid issues, But where this became a greater problem that I did not foresee was with the arms. So because the arms are resting on top of the knees, and one of the hands is also going to be on top of the other one, I have to be careful not to allow that geometry to merge together. So to avoid that, I split my character in half, which you can't see because I have hidden the seam line between these parts underneath her clothing, and that allows me to Dynamesh and Boolean and merge all sorts of things together without fear of the weird parts that I don't want to merge getting stuck together. So that hopefully is a good explanation of the issue and maybe how I got around it. Hopefully that makes sense, but if you have any more questions, you can of course throw them down in the comments. So that was just one issue with this character of many, and every character I work on has similar problems, stuff that you just can't always foresee until you are in the moment, and then you have to do some problem solving. Every character is a little bit like a puzzle in more ways than one. It's definitely akin to a puzzle in the fact that you have to slowly piece things together, but also in a way where each character feels new and different, and you have to come up with new solutions all the time. That's one of the things that I really love about character sculpting, these aha moments where you're like, oh, you know what? I could try this, and when it actually works, that just kind of feels really good. I mentioned earlier that the clothing was simple to initially create, but to create the trim around the edges, I was having some issues. I used what is called the Z Modeler brush for those. It's not really a brush though, it's more of a tool. It's the poly modeling tool in ZBrush. This allows you to directly affect each individual polygon face, edge, and vertice if you so wish. It can be a little frustrating to work with on occasion, but it is an extremely powerful tool, and it's something that every ZBrush artist should know how to use in my opinion. Another thing that you're going to see with the clothing is that I only model what you can see visually, just because if it's not seen, there's really no reason for me to make it. It was just a lot easier to manipulate the geometry this way. It's another one of those cases where I'm trying to work smarter and not harder, right? If you're making a character and they will always be wearing the same exact outfit, and you can't see certain parts of the body, in my opinion, is there really a reason for you to waste your time creating that? I don't think so, but if you're just doing it for practice, or you may need that body for some reason, then it's probably a good idea to put it in there. At this point, I begin posing the limbs and breaking symmetry on specific parts of the body. This was very hard just overall, mainly because there was so much interaction between all of these parts. The arms are resting on the knees, the hands are on top of each other, the legs are pressed together. There's just a lot going on here, and it took me quite a while to get the first rough pose figured out. I thought it would be a good idea to temporarily pose the head into where it needed to be. That way I can start adjusting the neck and body to account for the angle of the head. But after I got it into place, it was looking good enough to where I could make any additional changes asymmetrically from here if I needed to. I don't really like to get super technical in these videos, but if you have a model that has symmetrical geometry, like the head of my character, you can activate something called Poseable Symmetry. This allows you to work on your geometry as if it was still in a symmetrical axis. So it's a really cool feature where you can maybe pose a character like I've done here, but still be able to work on it somewhat symmetrically. It doesn't work with every tool, but it does work with most brushes. So this is the point at which I realized that she had two buns in her hair, because there was just no way that the single bun in the middle of her head could be visible from the angle that her head is tilted at. So that was definitely something that needed to change. I duplicated that bun, combined a lot of other pieces of geometry and repurposed it by mirroring it over to the other side, and then just making some small asymmetrical changes to the hair in general. I wanted to create a very simple environment like in the reference image, so I got to work creating the wall and floor. Originally I had her sitting on a cylinder to help get an idea of where her center of gravity was. I do this to make sure that my characters don't feel like they're going to tip over any direction. It's also very helpful in making sure that anything touching the ground plane deforms appropriately, just so I can make sure everything is flat and interacting in a way that we would expect. The floor and wall are very simple, so after a quick couple additions, we are good to move forward and do a general cleanup pass. This is something I like to do after taking a little break from looking at the character, so that I can come back with fresh eyes, new perspective, and hopefully be able to see all of my mistakes and things that need to be changed, which is not always the case, so typically I do quite a lot of cleanup back and forth. Lots of cleanup to the hair, lots of really small tweaks here and there to the body, just kind of finishing up small things like stripes for the socks, little things that I haven't had a chance to do up to this point. Overall, I wanted to keep this one a bit more loose and simple. I enjoyed working on it, but I really didn't want to spend 40 more hours from this point to get everything super polished. For my next video, I might do something even more simple just so I can get something out a bit faster. And then after that, I would like to do another full character that I spend a lot more time on. With personal work, it's kind of tough to do super polished character after character after character. I get really burnt out on that kind of thing because I also want to do small sketches and studies, kind of like this one. This character was a little bit more in the vein of a study, as I mentioned earlier, with the pose, which was very tough, but I really had a lot of fun working on this character. So this is where I will export my model for rendering, send it over to Blender, which is my rendering program of choice for the time being, set up a few quick lights, and render out something nice and quick. I typically just do a simple 3-point studio lighting setup, nothing too crazy there. I tried to match the direction of the lights here, but I didn't want to spend really too much time on that either. So something clean and simple here for sure. Well, here is the final character render. I hope that you guys enjoyed the process for those that didn't just skip here to the end. If you want to learn more about digital sculpting, then I encourage you to check out my course, the Appeal Academy, or my Gumroad for smaller courses, brushes, and materials. You can find all of that at the link in the description. Click that subscribe button if you are new around here. Let me know down in the comments what you think I should sculpt next. And with that, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope to see you again in the next video.